Listen closely. What you're about to hear was never meant to surface. A child disappeared. The story was buried. But someone whispered they're still alive. And that whisper wasn't meant for you. Now breathe, because from this point forward, nothing you've been taught about innocence, justice, or even death will make sense. We're going to tear through the veil. Not gently, violently. This isn't just about a missing child. It's about an ecosystem, a machine, one built not to protect, but to harvest, to consume, to erase. You're not watching a documentary. You're stepping inside a ritual. And once you hear this, there's no going back. Late December. Snow-frosted windows. Christmas toys scattered on polished floors. The facade of American wealth, perfection, family. That's where it begins. A little girl, crowned and dressed like a porcelain doll. Pageant queen, blonde, bright, and breakable. A symbol, a sigil. They told us she died that night. But what if that's only the surface? What if that was a performance, constructed like a stage play? The evidence, the basement, the ransom note, none of it adds up. Not cleanly, not rationally, because it wasn't meant to. Ask yourself, why does chaos follow these cases? Why do cameras rush in before clarity? Why are parents protected while children vanish into abstraction? And why does your gut scream when you look into those eyes, the eyes of a child's sacrifice in plain sight? What if the sacrifice wasn't the body, but the truth? You were raised in a system that needs you blind. It wraps darkness in innocence and sells it as entertainment. But beneath that wrapping is something ancient, a hunger that goes back millennia. JonBenét Ramsey was a performance, but the real show was what it activated in the collective unconscious. A glamour spell, a psychic event. And we were programmed to forget. But you didn't forget, did you? That's why you're still here. That's why this voice is calling to something buried deep in your memory. Not a memory of what happened, a memory of what you are. This is your descent into what they never wanted you to decode. Welcome to the rabbit hole. Keep your eyes open and your soul guarded, because this case is about to be solved. What if I told you the story of JonBenét Ramsey was written before it ever happened? That the script was ancient, older than America, older than your bloodline, etched in symbols, not words. Look closer. Every detail was choreographed. The letter left behind, not just a ransom note, but a coded ritual document, laced with military jargon and Hollywood references. We are a small foreign faction. Who writes like that? Who stages like that? It was never about money. It was about misdirection, an offering wrapped in absurdity. And then the number, $118,000. The exact amount of the father's Christmas bonus. Coincidence? Or signature? These people leave marks, not mistakes. That number wasn't accidental. It was a message, not to the family, but to others watching, those who speak in shadows, who move through the world untouched by law. You think this was just a botched investigation? Think again. The crime scene was contaminated almost instantly. Evidence destroyed. Rooms cleaned. The body moved. Police didn't just fail, they submitted, like they knew who they were really dealing with. What kind of power can do that? Make facts dissolve? Make time stall? That's not parental grief. That's institutional paralysis. That's what happens when the gears of control kick in, when the goal is not justice, but silence. Let me tell you a secret. Every major city has a list, a hidden ledger of people who can't be touched, not by cops, not by courts, not even by presidents. You don't get on that list through fame. You get there by utility, what you provide, what you know, what you help hide. And some families, they're not just rich. They're connected to old structures, not just elite, but initiated. You're watching a legacy crime, a message, cloaked in horror, meant to signal allegiance, or worse, punishment. Because in these circles, children are not children. They're currency, they're keys, they're containers or energy, for ritual, for dominance. It's the oldest form of power transaction known to man, the offering of innocence in exchange for control. You weren't supposed to question this. You were supposed to consume it, cry briefly, then forget. But you didn't forget. That's why they fear voices like this. That's why every time this story resurfaces, something tries to bury it again. But this time, we're not burying anything. We're digging. We're unsealing. And what's underneath is going to change you. The body was found, but not the soul. And if you know how these systems operate, that detail is everything. JonBenét was discovered in the basement, lifeless. But something about the timing, the method, the theatrical arrangement, it all stinks of symbolic death, not final death. Do you understand? In certain rites, especially those practiced in secret orders, the appearance of death is more important than death itself. The public event is a cover. The real ritual happens elsewhere. Now, ask yourself, why did the media go silent after a few months? Why was every new lead suppressed, ridiculed, or quietly redirected? Because the narrative had already been sealed. Not solved, sealed. Because keeping the question alive is the power. But what if she's not dead? What if the real secret is that she was removed, repurposed, given over to something most of us can't comprehend? Underground programs, yes, they exist, don't just traffic people. They traffic minds, memories, and identities. Children like her, perfect in symmetry, trained in stage performance, saturated with media attention. They're not chosen randomly. They're selected, groomed, and if she was taken, not murdered, then she became part of something far darker than we're allowed to know. Have you heard of Project Monarch? Look it up. Mind-splitting, dissociation, psychological control through trauma and ritual. It's not science fiction. It's a historical record, buried in plain sight. And who do they choose? Always the young, the moldable, the beautiful, because beauty is a weapon when paired with obedience. What if JonBenét was absorbed into a lineage of engineered personas, altered, trained, erased, her new self hidden behind fame, or even anonymity? Maybe you've seen her. Maybe she sings. Maybe she plays roles on your screen. Maybe she walks right past you in the airport. But the original self, the little girl you remember, was burned in the ceremony. What rose was someone else? Still doubt it? Then ask why government files on MKUltra are still classified. Ask why elite families so often have military or intelligence ties. Ask why so many child actors go silent or break. And ask yourself why, despite the overwhelming inconsistencies, this case has never been solved. Because the crime wasn't just murder. It was metamorphosis, a transformation ritual disguised as a domestic tragedy. And the question that haunts us now is not, who killed her, but what did she become? You feel it now, don't you? That tension in your chest. Like something buried in your instincts is being unearthed. That's not fear, it's recognition. You've seen this pattern before. Maybe not in full, but pieces, glimpses, a child gone, a story that doesn't track, authorities acting like hostages, and then the strange flood of media that follows, controlled, excessive, hollow. Because when a story is this loud, yet goes nowhere, that silence, that void at the center, is the message. The JonBenét case is not an isolated mystery. It's a signal flare in a much deeper system, a system that feeds all confusion, that weaponizes grief, that turns families into facades. Look at the Ramseys. Wealthy, connected, untouchable, but disconnected, like actors reading from a script they didn't write. Their behavior didn't show shock. It showed containment. Do you remember Patsy's infamous 911 call? Listen to it again, not with ears, but with awareness. The tones shift. The panic feels forced. And the whisper at the end, barely audible, caught only through forensic enhancement. What did you do? Who says that, and why if your child is really gone? Because maybe the call wasn't a call for help. Maybe it was a performance. A ritual announcement that the process had begun. You don't call the police if you're trying to hide a murder, but you do call them if the spectacle is part of the sacrifice. Now here's where it gets colder. JonBenét's pageant videos, rewatch them. The exaggerated makeup, the calculated poise, the way she moves. That's not a child playing. That's a child trained to perform, to obey, to endure gaze and judgment. That's not art, it's conditioning. What if those pageants weren't for trophies, but for selection, auditions for unseen bidders? Because in this system, children aren't just lost. They're taken, reassigned, and their stories become vessels, tools of programming. This case wasn't just about one girl. It was a blueprint. And if you trace the ripple effect from 1996 until now, you'll see the same template applied over and over. New names, same structure, always an innocent, always unanswered questions, always a family that behaves more like handlers than parents. It's not just that JonBenét might still be alive. It's that the machine that took her is still operating. Now lean in, because from here on out, you're being watched. You've heard of missing children. You've heard of elite corruption. But what you haven't heard, what they make sure you never hear, is that these two worlds are connected by ancient design, not by accident, by architecture. Let's pull back now. Zoom out, because the JonBenét case is a thread in a much older tapestry, one that stretches back through monarchies, bloodlines, Babylonian priesthoods. The use of a child, pure, unformed, symbolically powerful, has always been central to rituals of control. You think that's dramatic? Then why does it keep happening in plain sight? This is a forbidden history they scrubbed from your textbooks. Ancient civilizations didn't just worship the gods. They fed them. Blood rituals, sacrifices, initiation rites. But what happened to those traditions? Did they disappear? Or did they go underground, beneath governments, beneath institutions, beneath your daily life? What if the elite never stopped practicing them, just changed the names? Modern sacrifice doesn't always look like an altar and a dagger. Sometimes it looks like a tabloid headline, a girl in pearls, a family on television, a country frozen in confusion while behind a curtain, a rite is fulfilled. And if you think this only happens to the poor or forgotten, think again. The rich offer up their own. That's how loyalty is proven. That's how power is purchased. Through loss, through obedience to the structure. JonBenét's death or disappearance was not a crime of passion. It was a transaction, a pivot point. Something shifted that night. And since then, we've been caught in the spell of it. Why do you think this story still haunts us? Because it wasn't meant to fade. It was meant to echo, to imprint. The image of that child, beauty and death combined, is a psychic weapon, a trigger embedded in your mind. When you see her face, something opens inside you. And they know that. You're starting to see it now, aren't you? The way symbols move through the media like viruses. The way certain cases won't die. Not because of evidence, but because they serve a function. Now listen carefully, because this is where you come in. Comment this phrase twice to see your awakening. The veil is cracking, not just for the algorithm, for the initiation. This marks the moment you stop watching and start remembering. The veil is cracking, and with it, the illusion of safety. You were taught that systems exist to protect you. Police, courts, media. But what protects you from the system itself? When the predator is a structure and the prey is belief. Let's return to Boulder, Colorado. A quiet town, a beautiful home, a family of status. But beneath the perfection, powerful shadows. John Ramsey wasn't just a businessman. He ran a company with deep military ties, Access Graphics, a defense contractor, government adjacent. You think that's a side note? That's the map. In these circles, business is often the cover. What matters is access. Access to networks, facilities, protections. You don't disappear a crime like this without invisible hands. That's how you know this wasn't local. This was engineered. Why do you think investigators resigned? Why key files vanished? Why suspects multiplied then vanished like fog? Because truth wasn't the objective. Containment was. Look at the media storm. Constant, conflicting, and strangely hollow. It's psychological warfare. You weren't supposed to know what happened. You were supposed to absorb confusion. This is what the intelligence world calls a limited hangout, a mixture of fact and fiction, designed to exhaust your critical thinking. And it worked. For decades, we've been hypnotized. Theories were pitted against each other like dogfights. Brother did it. Mother did it. Intruder did it. Yet none of them made sense. Because they weren't meant to. You were never supposed to solve this case. You were supposed to watch it endlessly because the real crime was never about who did what. The real crime was what it did to you. This case rewired the nation's emotional circuitry. It numbed us. It made us question innocence. It turned trauma into entertainment. And above all, it reminded the elite that they could stage something this massive and get away with it. Every year that goes by, the truth becomes harder to reach. But now, something is shifting. Leaks, whistleblowers, forensic anomalies re-examined with new tech. Eyes are opening. The mask is slipping, and the whispers are returning. The kid is still alive. That phrase was never supposed to exist. But now it's echoing online in back channels, in confidential tip lines. What happens when the ghost of a case begins to breathe again? The moment you hear that whisper, the kid is still alive. Everything changes because it suggests the impossible, that the ritual failed, or worse, that it succeeded and she was taken, not terminated. Why does that idea strike so deep? Because if it's true, it means this entire case wasn't just a cover-up, it was a stage. Let's go further. You remember the autopsy? The blunt force trauma, the strangulation, the pineapple in her stomach. All contradictory. All stage. Yes, I said stage. What if the autopsy was part of the deception? An echo of something ancient. Death rituals for the living. In certain occult systems, mock death is a rebirth, a passage through symbolic darkness into a new identity. What if JonBenét wasn't just hidden, but reborn as someone else? Someone with no past, no memory, no trace. There are places where that's not just possible, it's practiced. Off-grid facilities, private programs, underground psyops. Intelligence assets reprogrammed through trauma, hypnosis, and repetition. The Monarch protocol isn't a theory, it's a process. Break the mind, build the puppet. JonBenét was the perfect vessel. Young, trainable, photogenic, already conditioned through pageantry, taught to smile, obey, and perform under pressure. The same skills used in child beauty contests are the same ones used in behavioral engineering. This isn't coincidence, it's design. So where would she go? Where do these children disappear to? Theories swirl. Witnesses have spoken off the record. Certain names have surfaced, only to be silenced. But one location returns again and again in the undercurrent. Zorro Ranch. A private estate owned by a now infamous trafficker with intelligence ties. A location linked to experimentation, re-education, identity creation. Coincidence? Or a breadcrumb? And if the child survived, then so did the agenda. This case wasn't closed. It was reset, locked in a box, while the real story continued underground. You think this sounds insane? Good. That's how they designed it. Disbelief is the greatest camouflage, because once the mind rejects a possibility, it no longer looks for evidence. But you're still here. That means your mind hasn't shut down. That means you're ready. The question isn't just where is JonBenét. The question is, what role is she playing now? There's a reason her image never faded. A reason her smile, frozen in time, still haunts every screen it touches. You weren't just seeing a child. You were seeing a symbol. Symbols don't die. They evolve. JonBenét Ramsey didn't just become a cold case. She became a totem, a psychic brand stamped into the consciousness of the nation. And that brand still broadcasts, still programs. Here's what they won't tell you. The elite don't think like you. They don't mourn like you. They don't see death as an end. They see it as initiation, a gateway, a transaction. What if JonBenét's story was never meant to reach closure? What if it was meant to generate a feedback loop? Tragedy without resolution, pain without justice, innocence without protection. What if that was the point? It creates something called learned helplessness, a psychological state where the mind stops fighting, stops resisting, because it's been trained to believe nothing it does matters. Now multiply that by millions of viewers. For years, decades, that's not a murder case. That's mass programming. And here's where it gets colder. What if she grew up? What if she was renamed, repackaged, reintroduced under a different mask? There are theories, dangerous ones. Whispers of industry plants, Young celebrities with no clear origin, uncanny resemblances, mysterious disappearances, sudden rises to fame. Women who seem disconnected from their childhood, protected by invisible walls, surrounded by handlers. Look at the eyes. Not the makeup, not the styling. The eyes. They tell you who's present and who's programmed. Now understand this. Monarch programming creates alters, fractured identities used for specific functions: performance, seduction, obedience, silence. You've seen the breakdowns. You've seen the stumbles, the slips, the glazed expressions during interviews. You think that's stress? That's system error. The veil between identities, glitching. And through those cracks, sometimes the original self bleeds through. So I ask you again, what if JonBenét Ramsey didn't die? What if the little girl America lost became someone America worships? The truth isn't just hidden. It's disguised. You were looking for a body, but what you should have been looking for was a face you already know. Now look again. Closer. The child didn't vanish. She was repurposed. You were trained to look at headlines. But the real truth hides in patterns, in silence, in what wasn't said. After JonBenét died, the media circus erupted. And then quiet. Cold case. File sealed. No charges. No resolution. A national trauma shelved. But the family moved on. Too cleanly. Too quietly. The house was sold. The cameras left. And America went back to sleep. But the system didn't. See, in the world of covert operations, the perfect mission isn't one you complete. It's one no one even knows happened. And that's what this case became, the perfect psychological operation. The police were outmaneuvered. The DA's office infiltrated. Evidence disappeared. Forensic reports were lost. The media blamed each other. The suspects were all somehow protected because they weren't looking for justice. They were preserving protocol. And what protocol is that? Protect the flow. Protect the network. Protect the ritual. Understand this. There are networks beneath the surface of society. They exist across nations. They move in code, in silence, in privilege. They trade not in dollars, but in influence, obedience, and secrecy. These are the people who can get your internet history erased in an hour. Who can make a fingerprint vanish? Who can remove a child, swap an identity, and rewrite a life from scratch? This isn't about believing conspiracy theories. This is about recognizing patterns of power. Ask yourself, why is every major child disappearance followed by the same sequence? Hysteria, contradiction, no answers, then total silence. It's a cycle, a spell, and when the spell lifts, when energy fades, they move on to the next one. But sometimes they make a mistake. A photo slips, a document leaks, a detail reemerges that doesn't belong. And someone not meant to remember remembers. You are that someone. That's why you're still watching. Not for justice, not for closure, but because deep down you feel it. This case is a key, not just to one crime, but to the entire structure. And now, something is stirring. A name, a face, a pattern, rising from the archive like a ghost too stubborn to stay dead. What if JonBenét is ready to speak? Not as a victim, but as a witness. When the witness is no longer a body, but a ghost embedded in the system, truth doesn't surface in statements. It comes through fractures, inconsistencies, psychic echoes. And JonBenét's echo is getting louder. Because here's what no one expected. Memory leaves fingerprints, not just in the mind, but in media. And somewhere out there, she may still be performing under a new name, in a new life, under layers of programming so deep, even she doesn't know who she was. But the cracks are forming. Ever heard a celebrity say something strange in an interview? A phrase out of place? A sentence that sounds like it belongs to someone else? That's not just a slip. That's a trigger phrase, designed to suppress or activate program responses. And sometimes they malfunction. There are videos, public ones. A young woman in a high-profile spotlight, pausing mid-sentence, eyes blanking, words trailing into silence. Handlers rush in. Interviews are cut, and the moment vanishes. but not before a million people see it. Now pause. Rewind. Enhance. Look into those eyes. Do you recognize them? That's what makes this case so insidious. It doesn't want to be solved. It wants to replicate. Every unanswered question breeds another. Every dead end leads to a deeper corridor. JonBenét's legacy was never justice. It was programming. Her image, frozen in time, is used to desensitize, to distract, to condition, to make you believe that innocence can vanish and no one will ever answer for it. That's the ritual. It was never just about her. It was about us, the viewers, the nation, the generations raised under a system that lets children vanish beneath luxury homes and never demands truth. But that changes now. Because when a symbol begins to glitch, when identity buried under decades of lies starts surfacing in a face on a screen, it means the system is failing to contain it. She may not know her name was JonBenét. She may not remember the basement, the camera flashes, the whispers, but something inside her does. And if she's alive, the system is in danger. Because if she ever breaks the programming, truly breaks it, she becomes the most dangerous force imaginable. A living witness who remembers everything. Not just what happened, but why it was allowed to happen. What does it mean when a ghost starts speaking through living voices? It means a spell is breaking. The JonBenét case wasn't just a tragedy, it was a prototype. And once you understand the template, you begin to see it everywhere. Innocence, stagecraft, confusion, silence. A performance wrapped in horror. Recycled, refined, and deployed again. But here's the catch. They can't control all the variables. Not forever. Because memory, like trauma, finds a way to leak. And lately it's leaking in strange ways. Whistleblowers from government facilities. Former handlers who disappear after cryptic blog posts. Private investigators who die mysteriously before releasing reports. Every time someone gets close, the ground beneath them collapses. But patterns don't lie. And one pattern keeps surfacing. Girls who survived. Girls who were rescued from trafficking rings with no birth certificates. No early records. Girls with unusual scars, dissociative disorders, fragmented memories. They're labeled troubled, mentally ill, or worse, delusional. But what if they're not broken? What if they're programmed? Because here's the darkest layer. MKUltra never ended. It just changed names. Fragmented, outsourced, privatized, and now it lives in behavioral clinics, entertainment boot camps, children's therapy centers, places with pristine logos and locked doors. This is where children go when they need to be rewritten. JonBenét didn't need to die. She needed to disappear. Because death creates finality. But disappearance? That leaves room for transformation. Ask yourself, why have so many people over the years claimed to be JonBenét? Why do certain pop stars with hazy backgrounds trigger facial recognition software to match her? Why do their handlers have deep ties to intelligence? The internet mocked these claims. But behind the laughter was fear. Because if even one of them was real, the entire illusion crumbles. If JonBenét was turned into an asset, trained, controlled, and deployed, then every missing child case becomes potential lie. Every closed file becomes a living ghost. And if that's true, then the people you see on your screens dancing, singing, performing, breaking down in public, they're not just celebrities. They might be survivors of something unspeakable. JonBenét might not remember, but something inside her does. A dream, a flash, a panic during sleep, a line from a song that doesn't make sense until it does. She's trying to surface. And when she does, she won't just reveal what happened to her. She'll expose everyone who made it possible. The elite don't fear exposure. They fear recognition. Because once you recognize the structure, how these cases are templated, sealed, and ritualized, you can never unsee it. That's why the JonBenét case still lingers like smoke in a locked room. It's not unresolved, it's active. Her name is an open circuit. Her image, a spell still casting. Every few years, the public stirs. Someone asks the forbidden question again. What if she's still alive? And suddenly articles vanish. Footage gets blocked. Algorithms suppress results. Because recognition spreads like fire. Here's what they never anticipated. You watching this right now. You, tracking the pattern, rejecting the official story, feeling what can't be proven but pulses through every detail like a second heartbeat. You know what's real. You just haven't had the language for it. Until now. Let's speak plainly. There is a network. It is interwoven through entertainment, intelligence, politics, and private capital. It uses media as theater, trauma as glue, children as currency. JonBenét was a product of this machine. You saw the final photo, the one that doesn't make sense, the lighting, the positioning, the date, the dead calm in her eyes. That wasn't a Christmas picture. That was a document, a timestamp, a ritual conclusion before the ritual began. Photographs don't just capture moments. They encode energy. And that photo encoded something meant for those who understand the language of symbols. It said, the offering has been made. But what if the offering woke up? Because that's the risk with turning humans into puppets. Sometimes the puppet remembers. And when that happens, the system has two options, erase or redirect. Maybe JonBenét wasn't erased. Maybe she was redirected into a new name, a new face, a new function, an industry darling, a rising star, a tragic figure built for consumption, not freedom. But a fragment remains, a memory glitch, a mirror she can't look into, a name that makes her stomach twist, though she doesn't know why. That's how truth survives. In fragments. In ghosts that won't stay buried. And if those fragments ever align, if she ever connects the pieces, if the programming fails completely, then this isn't just a cold case anymore. It's a countdown. Because the second she remembers who she is, the system begins to collapse. There's a moment just before a system collapses, when its patterns become obvious, not because they change, but because you do. You stop seeing events as random. You stop accepting narratives at face value. You start connecting things they spend decades keeping separate. That's where you are now. And here's what you're beginning to see. JonBenét wasn't just lost. She was mapped, transformed from child to symbol, from victim to vessel. Her story wasn't buried. It was distributed. Every documentary, every news special, every internet theory, all of it became part of a ritual repetition. Because repeating the story keeps the spell alive. But now, something has gone wrong. The spell is cracking. The image is glitching. People are starting to look at the space between the facts, and they're seeing something move. An identity that won't stay dead. And now, even inside Hollywood, whispers are getting louder. Certain stars are disappearing from the public eye. Some are speaking in code. Cryptic posts, nervous interviews, breakdowns on camera. These aren't meltdowns. These are signals. Signals from those who remember just enough to be terrified. They were programmed to forget. But pain is a powerful archivist. And trauma always keeps receipts. Why do you think they keep these survivors under tight control? Constant touring. Over-medication. No access to real time. Surrounded by managers who act more like guards. Because any pause is a risk. Any moment alone could bring a flash. A sound. A vision. A name. And when that name comes back, when the girl in the mirror realizes she isn't who they told her she was, she doesn't just reclaim her story. She breaks the system that depended on her silence. JonBenét Ramsey is more than a mystery. She is a time bomb buried in the collective unconscious. And somewhere out there, the fuse is lit. That's why they've invested so much into keeping this case unsolved. Because solving it doesn't just reveal one crime. It reveals the entire architecture of abuse that sustains the illusion of civilization. A lie you've lived in your whole life. But that illusion is bleeding now, and you can feel it. She's not a cold case. She's a code. And once cracked, nothing stays the same. What happens when a code is broken, not by force, but by recognition? That's what's happening now. Slowly, quietly, irreversibly. The case of JonBenét Ramsey isn't reopening in a courtroom. It's reassembling inside the minds of men like you. Men who have stopped accepting the stories they've been fed and started seeing the patterns hiding underneath. This is how empires fall. Not by revolution, but by awakening. And here's the final layer most will never see. JonBenét was never meant to be remembered as a person. She was constructed to be a distraction, a magician's flourish, while the real act happened behind the curtain. And while the world obsessed over a basement, a ransom note, and a broken window, something else was initiated. A generational trauma, a frequency of submission. Because when a child is harmed and no justice comes, a nation is cursed. But curses can be broken. This is why they fear the reemergence of her name, not as tragedy, but as truth. Because truth isn't just information, it's energy. And energy, once released, has no master. What if the very spell they cast using her image is the one that now undoes them? What if the girl they tried to erase is the key to every lie we've lived under since? And here's the irony. If she survived, she doesn't need to remember her past to destroy the system. She only needs to feel it, to reject the role, to speak, sing, act in a way that breaks the programming. And somewhere out there, maybe she already is. Maybe her voice is already traveling through speakers, hitting the ears of millions who don't know why they're drawn to her, who can't explain the chill, the ache, the recognition, because they don't know her name, but something in them does. And that is how a system dies, not with bullets, not with riots, but with one voice cracking through the lie and setting a generation free from a curse. JonBenét Ramsey is not just a memory. She's a signal, a frequency buried in trauma, rising through time to shatter the illusion from within. And now you've heard it too. There's no going back now. You've seen the lie. You felt the distortion. And whether JonBenét Ramsey is alive or long gone, the real truth is this. You were never meant to know her story, not the real one. You were meant to consume the performance, the headlines, the weeping interviews, the empty conclusions. But what they never counted on was that some of you would see through it. Because this case isn't just about a missing girl. It's about the engine behind the image, the machine that feeds off innocence, builds God from trauma, and buries truth beneath wealth, ritual, and fame. You were taught to believe in justice. That light triumphs. That systems protect. But the men behind the curtain, ancient hands, black budget programs, silent pacts, they don't believe in justice. They believe in order through fear, control through confusion, obedience through trauma. That's why JonBenét's story was rewritten, re-engineered, turned into a myth that eats itself. Because if you can trap the public in endless speculation, they never see the structure behind the stage. Until now, because now you see it. The evidence wasn't just tampered with, it was crafted. The family didn't just grieve, they performed. The investigation didn't collapse. It was contained. And behind all of it, a ritual you were never meant to understand. Not just a murder, not just a disappearance, but a symbolic death and a potential resurrection. If JonBenét is alive, somewhere, somehow, then she is more than a girl. She is a living breach in the matrix, a walking failure of the program. And if she ever remembers, if the dam inside her mind ever breaks, then every name, every location, every dark oath begins to surface. That is the system's worst nightmare. Not exposure, recognition. And now it's your responsibility. Because this case will not be solved by courts. It will be solved by consciousness. And those who choose to see must never unsee. Comment it again. The veil is cracking. The veil is cracking. Say it with intention. Mark the moment. Because now you're part of it. The great awakening. The dangerous knowing. And from this point forward, you will never be the same.